So this is the Dell XPS 13 2-in-1. That's right, a 2-in-1. And I'm sure a lot of you might not be interested in this type of device, which I totally respect. And this is by no means a gaming laptop. It's really geared for people who prefer switching between a traditional laptop orientation to a tablet. Now, what's really interesting about this device is its form factor. It's fairly lightweight and it packs some power efficient specs. What are we talking here? Well, it's got the new 10th gen Ice Lake processor, the Core i7-1065G7, 16GB of RAM, 512GB of fast storage, an HDR400 certified IPS display powered by Intel's Gen 11 graphics. These are interesting specs since the standard Dell XPS 13 is now using Comet Lake, while their convertible notebooks like this one are getting Ice Lake. And the price of this particular config is $1,750, but Dell always has a sale going on all the time, so you could pick this up for less than $1,600, and the Canadian price for this guy goes for around $2,500, which is it's a lot of money. Now, for those of you who are keeping track of our Ice Lake coverage, we have reviewed the Razer Blade Stealth featuring the Ice Lake processor and a GTX 1650 discrete graphics card. So if you're interested in that review, I'll link it right over here. But why don't we get to this? But first, a quick message from our sponsor.
The new Cooler Master Master Mouse 710. Weird name, but damn, this thing is good. With an ultra lightweight body at only 53 grams for excellent flick control and aim correction, the ultra weave cable is awesome for wireless-like feel, the ambidextrous shape for me personally is super comfortable, and I like the shorter body, plus the glide is smooth thanks to white PTFE feet. Enjoy the domination with an excellent optical sensor, and despite the funky name, the Cooler Master MM710 is legit. Check it out below.
Alright, so let's start with the design. And XPS notebooks have been known for their amazing build quality, and this one is absolutely no different. There are two finishes available, a standard silver one with a black interior, and the Arctic white, which I have over here, and it costs $50 more. I'm worried about how long it'll stay clean, but if you like white MacBook looking products, then this one is for you. I like the grip of the palm rest, it definitely complements the typing experience, and the edges of the notebook are not too sharp, which makes it easier to type on. Opening the lid elevates the keyboard a bit, which gives it a slightly more ergonomic typing position. Overall, the build quality is really good with very little flex when opening or pressing down on the lid. The only issue we found is that when the notebook is opened past a certain point, the metal edges can scratch some surfaces since the bumpers aren't large enough. Now, about the keyboard. I know some people have said that they love it, but the keys are absolutely the worst that I've encountered on a notebook. It feels like typing on a cheap version of the Microsoft Surface cover and not a notebook. There's hardly any key travel, no feedback, it feels dead. And when I compare this to the HP Spectre X360, it's a day and night difference. There's actual proper travel distance, there's feedback, it actually feels like you're typing on a keyboard, and honestly, this is by far one of the best keyboards that I've encountered versus the XPS. This is absolutely a no-go in my books. The power button is located beside the delete key, and it acts as a fingerprint sensor, which doesn't actually work all that well. And to make matters worse, the LED backlighting is just embarrassing. I mean, look at it. The lighting doesn't even shine through the keycaps properly since each key seems to have something blocking the light in the middle. That makes it look like there's a shadow underneath. They're not even bright, and some keys are noticeably dimmer than others. Ironically, I had to turn off the backlighting to differentiate the keys during darker environments. This is just an absolute terrible implementation from Dell, in my opinion. On the positive side, the trackpad is great. It does feature Windows precision drivers, so gesture controls work flawlessly, and it is fairly wide enough so that you can use all of your 5 fingers to do your thing. So I guess that's a good thing. Port selection is extremely limited on the XPS 13 2-in-1, which is unforgivable on such an expensive device in my opinion. On the left-hand side, you get a Type-C Thunderbolt 3 port and a micro SD card reader. Yep, that's absolutely pointless. Switching to the right, you'll find an audio jack and another Type-C Thunderbolt 3 port, and that's it. So no full-size HDMI or a Type-A port, which means if you have one of them occupied by just powering or charging up the notebook, you only have one available, which means you can either only use an external hard drive, but then you can't use a mouse if you plan on, using that, or other accessories. You might have to go for an external dongle. Dell does offer a USB Type-C to Type-A adapter. Now, for instance, if I were to bring back the HP Spectre X360, this actually comes with a full-size Type-A port and 2 USB Type-C ports, so that at least gives you the option. The speakers are actually really good for a 13-inch notebook. They're not front-facing, but rather they're on each side of the notebook and they bounce back the surface of a table. So this is the webcam test on the XPS 13 2-in-1, and guys, it is absolutely terrible. I mean, welcome to 2019, where you spend $1,800 on a laptop and this is what you get. It's kind of unacceptable. As you can see, Michael is sitting beside or behind me. You can't even see him. I mean, he's completely, this is potato quality. It's worse than potato quality in my opinion. And what's even interesting is that as I was doing my recording or as I was testing the microphone, I noticed in some files there were some audio cracklings in the VO. So I'm going to play back some footage of that yeah, let me know what you guys think. The webcam this is a test. This is just a test to see, because we just noticed something very interesting. So yeah, that's it. That's the webcam quality. It's horrible. The display is a 13.4-inch WLED touchscreen with a resolution of 1920 by 1200, so it's a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, and there is a 4K option available, but that will cost you an extra $300. The colors look fantastic. I mean, you've got great viewing angles, amazing contrast ratios. It's also a very sharp panel and very bright with HDR 400 and Dolby Vision support, so outdoor visibility shouldn't be an issue, though it is a glossy screen, so do take note of that. Alright, so let's talk about one of the main selling points for this device. The fact that it can act as a tablet, a standard notebook, or just a screen. When in tablet mode, I don't really find it comfortable to hold. It doesn't close as flat compared to the HP. The HP was certainly a lot more smoother and more comfortable to hold in tablet mode. Touch input works really well and the display does exhibit some wobbling, but overall, it's pretty sturdy. Now in tent mode, the device is pretty stable, but before you place them in, do keep in mind that the metal frame does not have any bumpers, so you could end up scratching the surface of this device. The power adapter is very small, so you can easily toss this in your backpack. You shouldn't worry about taking too much space. The power connector for the XPS has an illuminated tip, so it's super easy to find in the dark. In terms of upgradability, well, unfortunately, you can't upgrade anything on the XPS 13 2-in-1 because the RAM and the SSD are soldered in. So basically, if you want to spec this thing out, you better do it while you're buying it. Now, before I talk about battery life, I do have to talk about the charging experience because it takes forever. So the last 25% takes over 2 hours to complete, which is certainly frustrating. Battery life, on the other hand, is really impressive. So on our light load test, refreshing a Chrome webpage for 15 seconds, the system lasted for around 10 hours. It's not as great as the X360, but that's because it has a bigger battery and of course a Whiskey Lake i7 processor. Under heavy load, the XPS lasted for around 2 hours. And now on to gaming performance. Is the Ice Lake processor any good? Does the Gen 11 graphics make any difference compared to the UHD graphics on previous generation? Well, I'll be comparing 3 notebooks. So we have the XPS 13 2-in-1 with the Ice Lake processor, the 1065G7, and Iris Pro graphics. That CPU operates in a 25-watt mode. The HP Spectre X360, which has a previous gen Whiskey Lake Core i7-8565U, operates in 25-watt mode. The last contender is the Razer Blade Stealth 13 with the GTX 1650 Max-Q. It really isn't the same category, but it also uses the 1065G7 as the Dell, but in a 15-watt configuration, so it'll be interesting to see the CPU benchmarks. Starting things off with synthetics, the Dell performs really good with serious benefits over the 8th-gen Whiskey Lake CPU. It's also interesting to see what happens with the 15-watt spec Razer included. It's even slower than the HP in multi-core benchmarks. Moving on to some rendering benchmarks with Corona Renderer and Blender, they are pretty interesting. Blender sees a pretty significant advantage for the 25-watt Ice Lake processor in the XPS, but with Corona add-in for 3ds Max, things were a bit odd since the technically slower CPU in the Razer Blade Stealth won here. And why is that? Well, the Razer has better cooling solutions, so its clock speeds remain higher than the XPS during the test. Moving on to Premiere, and of course the Stealth is a big winner here since it uses the GTX 1650 to accelerate rendering times. The Ice Lake processor in the XPS did offer a lot more performance than the X360 though. Switching over to some light gaming, I was pleasantly surprised by what Ice Lake offered here. It's nothing closer to the Blade Stealth, but huge improvements over previous generation. You can actually get some light gaming done on this provided the Intel drivers behave properly. One other interesting thing is that the XPS 13 throttles clock speeds while it's being charged. So the only way to get full performance is when it's plugged in and the battery is full. It went all the way down to 1.7 GHz while the other 2 notebooks were perfectly fine. Now based on some of the benchmarks, you might have realized by now that temperatures are a bit of a concern. Under heavy multi-core workload like in Corona or Blender, the clock speeds shoot up to 3.5 gigahertz on all 4 cores, but a few minutes later, package temperature hits 96C and the CPU downclocks to 2.7 gigahertz or even less. The XPS 13 is really quiet until that happens and then the fans pick up speed. Dell did a good job, and even under full load, the sound never really got annoying. For exterior heat, I wouldn't want this on my lap when rendering a video, but otherwise, temperatures didn't get to worrying levels. Alright, so I think it's time to conclude this video. Dell and Intel have worked closely together to showcase what the XPS 13 and the new Ice Lake processor can offer. But is this the laptop that's more than a laptop? No, because in my opinion, the keyboard is shockingly bad. The two-tone functionality is not really the greatest, especially when compared to the HP Spectre X360. And then the minimal or the limited amount of ports, I think that's the biggest drawback of this notebook. 2 USB Type-C ports, that's nothing, because that would actually make you want to invest in Bluetooth accessories, which is an additional investment on top of what you're already paying for this machine. Not to mention there is thermal throttling under light gaming loads or even heavy multi-core workloads, so that's something to consider. But if I take a step back and re-evaluate what Ice Lake has to offer, there are a few positive things about it. The first thing's most obvious, CPU performance. It's actually really good compared to the previous generation Whiskey Lake processors. You can actually game on it as well, do a little bit of gaming, because the Gen 11 graphics is actually pretty impressive. And this notebook also offers great battery life. You've also got Wi-Fi 6, so there's future-proofing down the line, and it's got great build quality. But would I pay $1,500 for it? No, because while the performance is great, I just feel like the rest of the notebook still leaves a lot to be desired. We certainly have a few notebooks with Comet Lake processors coming in, so that'll be interesting to test out. But until then, I'm Ibor with hardwarecanucks. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out some relevant content over here, subscribe for some more cool content, and also make sure to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on a new video. I'm signing off, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.